maybe you recognize this piece of material, maybe you've seen it before. This is a 2x4 material that is typically used for construction type lumber. Now when we work with construction type lumber, all of the pieces that come, if you order a 2x4, are all going to be the same size. Now in reality it's not 2x4, it's about 1.5 inches by 3.5 is its actual size. Now 2x4s are typically sold by the piece, where you'd buy a 2x4 8 foot long. If you want to buy another piece that's longer, like a 2x4 10 foot, generally speaking, you're paying by the foot. So the 10 foot piece is the same price per foot, it just has longer distance on it. So we can, a lot of times when we're measuring things like a 2x4, since they're all the same, we are taking a linear measurement. So if you're going to cut your 2x4 down to a size, or you want to know how big it is, you would take your tape measure and measure in a straight line to get a linear measurement. Okay? Construction material, generally speaking, comes all the same. So if you buy units of 2x4s, they're going to all be all the same thickness and width. It might not be 2x4, maybe it's a 1x. The 1x materials generally come at 3/4 inch thick, and they come in those same nominal sizes as the 2x4. So 2x4 or 1x4, 1x6, 2x6, it doesn't matter. But generally speaking, construction lumber comes in a uniform format. You wouldn't want 2x4s that are all a little bit different. Some of them stick out further, some of them a little narrower, because when you're building walls of a house or something like that nature, you don't want your walls to be all curvy and wavy, because some of these are sticking out further or are in further than the others. So they need to be nice and uniform. Here we have two pieces of hardwoods that would be used for the cabinet making type industry. This wood is a little different than our construction lumber, because what happens here is they take the tree and try to get the most out of it. So you get some boards that are really wide and some boards that are really narrow. And it depends on how wide the tree was when it was cut down and where this fell in the cutting of that log apart. So here is some of our hardwoods, a unit that's been put on our storage rack. And here you can identify and easily see that they're all kind of different widths and lengths. Well, you can't really see the length in this video, but you can see the width, and you can see that none of them really appear to be the same. And you maybe find 2 or 3 in this pile that are exactly the same width. But overall, the widths are all different, again, because they're trying to get the maximum amount out of that board or that tree that they have cut down. Now, since all of the pieces come different lengths and widths, some of them may vary in length by as much as a 1/2 inch. Some of them may vary in width up to a couple inches. We have to be able to determine how much material is here. So in this piece of wood, if we take a look at it, we have to be able to determine how much material is here versus this piece. We can't just say this one's 2 feet long or 3 feet long and this one's 1.5 feet, because that's not the same amount of material because of their different widths. So how do we determine how much material is here? We use what's called board feet. Board feet is going to take our material. We're going to take the length, how far it is, length times width times thickness. And we're going to use inches when we're measuring. So in cabinet making stuff, we're typically dealing with smaller measurements. So we're going to use the inches. All of our measurements must be in inches for this formula to work. Now, if you're working in construction type material, or you're working with longer pieces, such as you're building a wall, then maybe you're measuring in feet, and you would have to convert that to inches to work. So the first thing we need to do, by taking the length of the board and the width of the board and the thickness of the board, the first thing we need to do is make sure we're measuring in all inches. So we would take these measurements and we're going to times them all together. So we're going to find the volume of this piece of wood by length times width times thickness is going to find us the volume. Then what we're going to do is we're going to take and divide that volume by 144. Let's take a look at that. All right, so our board foot formula is length in inches by width in inches by thickness in inches. So length times width times thickness. And we're going to put this number over 144. So we're going to do to the top, we're going to do the top measurements first, and then when we get that, we're going to divide that number by 144. Now where we get 144 from is if we take 1 square foot, we have a square piece that's 1 foot by 1 foot. Okay, that 1 foot by 1 foot is also 12 inches by 12 inches. So we're finding what the square inches are in 1 square foot. So 12 times 12 is 144. That's where we're getting the 144 for the bottom of our formula. So let's take a look at our piece here, and let's pull a tape measure out and see what we get on this side. So if I'm going to pull all the way down to the end and all the way down to here, I'm getting 37 inches long. So I would put that in my formula. I'm going to put 37 inches by how wide it is. Now, on a piece of hardwood, what I like to do is measure in 2 to 3 spots. And for the purpose of this class, I want you to measure on the 2 ends in the middle, and we're going to take the kind of average size there. So because it has this kind of wane edge here, I'm going to flip this over and use a side that has nice square edges. So I'm going to take my measurement. I get 11 3/8, and I will come down to the middle of the board, and I'm going to measure here, and I'm also getting 11 3/8. Very rare that you would get 11 3/8 all the way down the board, but we do in this case. Usually the board may get skinnier at one end, the board may warp and twist, and so this one's kind of an anomaly that it happened that way. But it was 11 3/8, so 11 3/8. Now 3/8 as a decimal is the same thing as 0.5, and that's going to work better in our formula. So we're going to take 37 times 11 3/8 times the thickness. Now this material, if we measure this material, this is 4/4 material. Now we get our 4/4 material in at 15/16 thick. That allows us plenty of room to work the material down to the right size before we get too thin and the board becomes not strong. So this allows us to do lots of things to it when we keep it at 15/16. So I measured 15/16. That's what the mill has sent it to us as, but in reality, we're still paying for that full inch. This would be true as well on a piece of material that's 3/4. Maybe you only need it 3/4 of an inch thick for the final project, but ultimately you're paying for an inch thick material. So to calculate our board feet, we're going to put 1 for our thickness. Now this could be different. If this material were 2 inches thick, it would be 8/4 material. If it was 1.5 inches, it would be 6/4 material. So the quarters, okay, just like your normal fraction, would determine how thick it is and what you're using, okay? But for the formula, we want it in that whole number like that. We're not going to put 4/4, although it does equal 1. That's going to make it more difficult to complete our formula. So we're going to leave it as 1 inch thick. So now we're going to take 37 times 11 3/8 times 1. So now we have our numbers. We're going to take our calculator and do our math. So we're going to take 37 times 11.375 times 1. It's good to always put that in there, even though it's 1 and anything times 1 is itself, because sometimes this isn't 1. Sometimes it's 2. Sometimes it's 3, or whatever it may be. So it's always good to do that 1, even though it's, in this case, it's going to just not add anything on. So that's 420.875 cubic inches of material. Now we're going to take that number and divide it. Okay, we're going to take our formula and divide it by 144. Okay, so I've got that number in the calculator. We've got that there. We're going to take divide by 144, and this would be our answer. So this board that we just looked at has 2.92 board feet, okay? Typically we do our standard measurement of rounding. So because if we're doing 2 decimal places, that's a 2, it's going to leave the 2 in front of there alone. So 2.92. 2.92 board feet in this piece of material. Now, that's how much is there. Now, if you're going to try to figure out how much this costs, you're going to need to know how much this piece of material is. So this piece is oak. If our oak is coming in at $3.25 a board foot, we're going to take $3.25 times that 292. So I'm going to clear out my calculator. I'm going to take 2.92 and I'm going to take it times 3.225, and that equals $9.49 for this piece of wood. Now, you have to remember that oak does not always stay at one price. Just like any other commodity, it fluctuates, goes up and down depending on markets. So today it might be $3.25. Next week it could be $4.25. It could change. The same process that we just did for figuring out this board would be true for this board. Okay, this is a different species. This is hickory, and it's going to be the same process to figure it out. You're going to take the length of the board, overall length in inches, the width of the board in inches, and the thickness of the board in inches, and divide by 144. Can't forget to divide by 144, otherwise the formula doesn't come out correctly. Another way for measuring, we talked about linear measurements, we've talked about board feet, we're finding the volume and dividing by 144. The last one we're going to talk about that you might see in the architecture and construction industry is square feet or square inches. And if we're figuring something out square, typically what we're doing is we're going to end up covering this surface with something. Maybe you have a wall and you're going to cover that wall with some kind of sheeting. Maybe it's wallpaper, maybe it's paint, and you're trying to figure out how many square feet you need to cover that. So square feet is pretty simple, or square inches, doesn't matter, whatever unit you're measuring in. And you would measure the width of something and the length of something. So if we wanted to figure square inches on this, I'll take my piece of paper that we were writing on, and we'll take the length, which was 37 inches, but we'll just confirm 37 inches. So I would take, we can draw this on here square. We want to figure out how many squares that is. That's 37. And the width was 11 3/8. So 11 3/8 is, those are the only two measurements I would need to figure out how many square inches, in this case we're working on inches, we would need. And we would simply calculate that by taking 37 times 11.375, and that's going to give us 420.875 square inches. Okay, this would be square inches. That's how many square inches are in there. Now we could take this number and divide by 12 and figure out how many square feet there are in this material. This board is fairly small, so the square feet is going to be relatively pretty small. But square inches, 420 square inches in this long board. To find square inches or square feet, you take the length times the width, and that would give you the square footage. Now, when it comes to measuring your square inches or square feet, you've got to remember that if you're doing a room, let's put this board up like this and represent a room. Let's say this is the floor and this is the wall. We may have 400 square inches of floor, and that would be enough to cover this surface, but that's not necessarily enough to cover this in addition. So you would have to find the square feet or inches for your floor, and then each surface area, you would calculate the square inches or square feet to determine exactly how much coverage you would have if you were going to paint this, if you were going to cover it with wood, if you were going to cover it with flooring material, whatever it may be. So that 420 square inches would represent our floor material and would not take into account for the walls, depending on the walls that you would have around the room and a ceiling or whatever it is that you're trying to cover.